unless you had parents or that were connected to culture, unless you had parents that told you that these were Dakota trails, that these were old native trails, you weren't going to learn that in the school books. History wasn't going to tell you that, especially this Mill City area. You didn't hear about that in the school textbooks, you know. So I remember, you know, like taking field trips, you know, to this area or to the Fort Snelling. I've talked about that before and how very uncomfortable that was for me as a child, knowing that the narrative was so wrong, but not being able to articulate that as a young child. And you had the soldiers. And so, and then as children, you know, like Juanita was saying, we always ran to the river. We always were connected. We knew kind of either with parents, we went and down on the trails. Like, but I think, what we don't often get to talk about in terms of hidden history and being erased is the genocide that happened here in the Americas, Minnesota, particularly all over Turtle Island, really. We never use those words. The ways we're still visible is we still have our language. Our children are still here. Many of us are revitalizing it. And I think that those are really powerful ways for us to continue to heal, to recover. We don't often acknowledge, even as our own selves, our people, that, you know, we are survivors of genocide.
So a lot of my work involves working globally on an initiative called Miniki Wakan, which means water is sacred. It involves a number of indigenous co-conveners of indigenous peoples and youth. But in the process of sort of working on indigenous water rights, we've learned about a story of water that has occurred globally. One of the first vehicles for colonialism was the use of water. When it came over here and began colonialism, water theft, which initiated water colonialism. What I mean by that is that indigenous people share this time immemorial water relationship that predates Western water ethics and Western water relationships. And when that was disrupted, what occurred was disruption to our cultures, because the land and water is our culture. The land and water is our identity. And so it's about cultural revitalization in the same vein when it comes to who we are as indigenous peoples. In Minnesota Makochi, the land of misty and foggy waters, you know, you would think that that's a history that's rescaled to a global world level or widely known. But as people come here, you know, they kind of learn that in a peripheral. Minnesota, the land of misty and foggy waters. But you'll learn that when you come here and step foot in Minnesota, that the Dakota nations here, their names, their national identities are named after the water. Medewa Kantu, the people of the water, people born of the water, people of the sacred lake. And so water is a national identity shaper to indigenous nations. And this is similar across the world. So there's a global story here that water has an impact. So any body of water, no matter how small, can have a global impact.
It just always amazes me. I'm involved in a few of those different conversations in different ways. And there's almost like this proportionality between how sacred a place was and how desecrated it became through industrialization. And, you know, the Wakan Teepee project and the Lower Phelan Creek project, you know, that has a ton of sewage infrastructure that essentially dumps effluents on the Wakan Teepee, you know, on God's house, you know. So we're trying to, we can't go back and undo the past, but we can do better going forward.
There was a lot of federal Indian law and policy that tried to disassociate us from all of these connections. You know, whether it was boarding schools, whether it was the lure of economic self-sufficiency and the relocation program. The lure was, you're economically disadvantaged on the reservation, we can help you be self-sufficient, but the goal was to disassociate us from family, homelands, culture, and identity, right? What they didn't know is that we would res up no matter where we went, right? We found our community and we recreated our community, and they might have been of many nations in an urban area, but we found each other so that we could create safe place and we can create community, and that our struggles weren't alone.
A lot of the medicines that we need for our healing and for our continued survival, a lot of times are along the river and around the river, and they survive without anybody's input or say. And so we have a lot of people in our community today that can share that knowledge with us in a different way and a different perspective than we didn't really have access to before. We didn't really understand, but yet at the same time, it always existed. So when we saw it, we were like thrilled. But today I've been going on many foraging trips with Hope and others, and really excited about what you see along the river that I hadn't really seen before, but I go to South Dakota to dig it up and look for it. I go home to North Dakota. I'm from Spirit Lake, but to find these things that are all around me. And every day I go out of my house thinking of things I need to go look for, and they're all around me. And so the wonderful thing about our river is that it really was a place for us to come heal as well. And our relatives are in these mounds all along the river and all down the Mississippi. And so, that earth that they're walking on, that's our relatives. So we're not that far removed from it. And it's just a matter of trying to find that connection and understand that connection that exists. And so many of us have been sort of so far removed from that idea of who we were and what we were and how we were, that we think that everything that they were trying to put into us kind of worked at times, the whole economic piece of it, and how that's how we look at things. The land is a monetary thing, and that was never something we were raised with knowing, and understanding. And so it's really difficult to try and maneuver in this conversation, even because so much of the stuff about the river is kind of looking at who owns it, who's responsible, what power do we really have. And again, I just remind us that the river kind of she has the upper card here. She has the power.